Good morning, everyone. So there's a student who was away at college and he was running short on funds. So he wrote home, "Dear Dad, no mun, no fun, your son." And the father replied, "Dear son, too bad, so sad, your dad." Don't you love families? Families are great. And God made families. He invented families. And I'm glad he did. So here in Ephesians chapter 6, the first 4 verses, we address parents and children. And we learn that God really does care about families. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. And of course, you all know we need healthy families, don't we? We need healthy families for the church. We need healthy families for society, a building block society, a community for all of life. And so most people understand this. We understand that we need healthy families to build a strong society. In fact, as we study even the Roman Empire, they too wanted order and healthy families as well, and strong, because they realized that it led to strong societies. During the time of the Apostle Paul, the Romans, they had what we talked about this last week, but household codes for families. And it was their idea to establish order in the household and therefore society. And so Paul knows this well, and he borrows the well-established household codes of the time. And basically the household codes were 3 sets of pairings. And they were, first of all, husbands and wives, in this order, fathers and children, masters and slaves. And so Paul uses the same 3 pairings, but we notice some significant changes. So this is just a summary, but this is last week's passage, today's passage, and the following week as well. But wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. Children, obey your parents. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. And finally, slaves, obey your masters with respect. Masters, treat your slaves the same way. Now, you may not notice immediately, but let me just point out some significant changes. First of all, you will notice that the order is changed. So instead of husband first, wife, father, children, master, slaves, you'll notice that Paul addresses it in reverse. The order is reverse. Paul addresses first the wife, then the husband, the child first, then the father, the slave first, and then the master. So it looks like he begins with what we would see as the oppressed and the weaker of the day, and then he follows with the stronger. And he names them. He names them. And by naming them, he dignifies people, thus giving in the church and, of course, in society. And this is actually highly unusual, maybe unprecedented, the order of things. And then, of course, he does another thing. The power of the stronger is then diminished. And so the husband, father, and master are assumed to have the rule and the power and the authority in the home. So historians tell us that the husband, father, and master, often the same person, held absolute power and rule over their household. But the instructions that are given here, what Paul gives here, it actually diminishes power and their authority, likely to stop abuses of power and control. And then, of course, the third follows. The weaker members are empowered. So since the power of the husband and father and master is diminished, the traditional weaker people, wife, children, slaves, are empowered. And so when the Christian households, especially the weaker members, first heard these words from Paul, they noticed the order is flipped. They're never addressed directly, actually. they immediately knew a new wind of teaching is happening. So basically what we're seeing here is the infusion of the good news of Christ into families, especially for those who were treated as lowly and as things. So Paul addresses everyone directly as if to say, you all belong to God's family. You are important. You are valuable. You are treated as equals in God's household through the filling of the Spirit and your identity in Jesus Christ. So with that background in mind, and it's significant, let's look at Paul's instructions more specifically here. So first of all, we begin with the responsibility of children. And we know these verses well. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. So most cultures of the world have recognized the authority of parents over their children. Most societies would frown on the disobedience of children. So neither was this instruction really shocking or surprising for first century listeners. This is how God designed families. But Paul also says not only children obey your parents, he adds things. He Christianizes them, right? Obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And so children are instructed, of course, to obey their parents, but they have to understand that parents are their God-given authorities, but also because of the child's relationship with Jesus Christ. Your true father or your parent is God the Father. Children are encouraged to see their obedience as an obedience to the Lord, an expression of their love and commitment to Jesus Christ. So when children submit to their loving authority of the parents as unto the Lord, they really are truly blessed. And that's the way we need to think about these things. This is really a blessing, especially when children are young, of course. Their obedience to the loving authority of their parents is critical because, to state the obvious, young children aren't capable of parenting themselves. Did I even need to say that, right? Young children are not capable of parenting themselves. Children are born into the world as sinful human beings. Psalm 51:5 says, "Surely I was sinful at birth, sinful from the time my mother conceived me." You know, children are awfully cute, aren't they? Awfully cute, awfully cuddly, made in the image of God, but they are born self-centered, right? Doesn't mean they're all bad. We're not saying that at all. But there's this tendency to think me, myself, and I. Yeah, you might know the story of a little boy whose mother wanted him to sit down, but he would not sit down. Finally, she took hold of him and sat him down in the chair. He looked up her in defiance in his eyes and said, "You may sit me down on the outside, but I am still standing up on the inside." All right? I'm not sure if you read that article about that Porter flight going to somewhere, and a child refused to sit down, and they had to cancel the whole flight. Boy, I'd like to get inside the brain of the dynamics of what was going on in that family, but wow. Anyway, all to explain, sometimes children can be very, very strong-willed. And so children need the loving, firm authority of mom and dad. So children, your obedience to your parents is really a gift to you. And he goes on, children, honor your parents. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. So Paul now anchors what he's saying into a famous passage in Deuteronomy 5:16. But what does it mean to honor your parents? And what about the promise that it will go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Is there a connection between honoring your mom and dad and the quality of your life on earth? Well, I think there is. Honoring your parents goes beyond the childhood stage, right? We know that. It goes for the rest of your life as long as your parents are living. So this command applies to all of us, not just children. But when children demonstrate a healthy respect for their mom and dads in action, in an attitude, God blesses your life more than you realize. Because I believe it sets the course of healthy relationships of all kinds. But when children are disobedient, rebellious, resentful, show disrespect for their parents, it can disrupt the quality of their life emotionally and physically, relationally and spiritually. There's all kinds of research about this. Disobedience can slam the door to learning and wisdom. You do not want an unteachable child. But that's what rebellion is, right? I'll do it my way. I refuse to listen to the wisdom of my mom and dad. Nothing can be learned from any situation, whether good or bad, when there is a layer of pride wrapped around children. But children who learn to respectfully honor their parents learn to respect all authorities given to them in life, right? Of course, we know that as we grow up, guess what? We have authorities all around us, right? Our work, we have bosses. At school, we have our teachers and principals. Everywhere you go, you have authorities in your life. But children who dishonor their parents may fail to respect any authority figures in their life. And that is a sad story if they can't do that. And they become the least successful people in their life when they fail to respect authorities in their life. So there's a good reason why God wants children to obey their parents and to honor. Is really protecting us from what can harm us because of bitterness and rebellion in the heart. Well, shall we turn to the parents? Is that okay? Well, you really have no choice, because here I come. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. So, Paul begins by what you shouldn't do. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, or do not provoke your children to wrath or anger. Is he picking on fathers? Because you notice he doesn't say mothers here. It probably reflects the culture of the day, honestly, because, obviously it's for mothers as well, but I think there's a little bit of indication that he's concerned about how fathers treated children back in the first century. Earlier, Paul says, in your anger, do not sin. So how do we provoke our children? What's a more contemporary word? How do we tick off our children? How's that, right? How do you tick off your children? So let me give you 3 ways to do that, okay? Number 1, be a dominant parent. The dominant parent ascribes to the philosophy that it's my way or the highway. Well, this is probably maybe the stereotypical Roman dad. And it sounds like other cultures as well, right? This kind of parent is the military commander who still has not learned that submission taught earlier in Ephesians 5:21 is actually for everyone, even parents. So what's happening here is he abuses his authority. Yes, he's a God-given authority, but he's abusing his God-given authority, and he fails to treat his children as human beings with respect. Because, of course, back in those days, children were treated simply as things. Children were belittled perhaps privately and maybe in public. Little good is acknowledged in the children, even though he wants good to come out of them. Isn't that ironic, right? To get good out of their children, he berates them. or she berates them. So there is a high degree of control in this kind of parenting, but little warmth. Dominant parents have high expectations. I know lots of cultures that have high expectations, right? You only got 99% on your course. What happened to the other percent, right? That type of hyper standard, right? But seldom do they show warmth. It's always about these heavy expectations, and there are very few explanations for the rigid rules. And so this type of parenting tends to produce the most negative qualities in children. Secondly, if you want to tick your children off, be a neglectful parent. Now, the neglectful parent tends to both lack loving support and control over their kids. So this is where they're a little different from, well, quite a bit different from the dominant parent, but they don't have much control. They show both an uncaring and immature attitude towards their children, and they will lash out their children when they are pushed or irritated. Children are seen as a bother, not to be heard. They rob their children of emotional accessibility and provide no boundaries for their children. So this type of parent seems to be in an eternal state of frustration. They have their own personal issues. So they say things like this: work it out by yourself. Can't you see that I'm busy, right? So the kids are treated as just kind of in the way. That's your problem. I've got to get to work. Can't you see blah, 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 stuff like that. And so consequently, the harshness and the neglect tend to wound the spirit of children, leading to all sorts of issues, maybe rebellion, bitterness. And kids like this who grew up in these homes generally exhibit low self-esteem. They lack confidence. So that is the neglectful parent. Thirdly, if you want to exasperate your children, be a permissive parent. Permissive parents, they love their children. They're warm, they're supportive, which is a good thing. But they're weak in establishing and enforcing rules and limits for their children. I'm not sure if that describes today or not. I'm not really sure, but maybe. This is the complete opposite of the dominant parent. One of the reasons why parents are too permissive is the thinking that if they're too strict, they will damage their children. A lot of times it's an overreaction to the way they were raised, right? Maybe you were raised in a dominant, authoritarian home, and then you become this type of parent. You go the other way. But the fear of discipline of the children can produce further problems and produce the very things that parents fear. So remember, a child cannot parent themselves. When a child is not disciplined or guided in any way, their disobedience and defiance, according to Scripture, can lead to poor consequences. Proverbs 13:24 says, "Who spares the rod hates the son, but he who loves him is careful to discipline them." There's a lot in the Proverbs and the Psalms and elsewhere about proper constructive discipline. So let's go to the positive here. Paul says, bring them up in the instruction of the Lord. You know, we're talking about Christian parenting. How do Christians parent differently? Christian parenting models our parenting after God himself. Maybe does that sound obvious? But we have to think about that, right? It reflects the person of God. It reflects the person of Jesus Christ. And then we relate it to our children. So it is demonstrating empowering love and also when necessary, constructive discipline. Because as we read our Bibles, God seems to relate to us that way too, right? It is always held together. So verse 4, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Although they are to obey their parents, we have a responsibility to create a loving and well-defined environment to encourage our children to be responsive children where obedience to us can be one of loving security as unto the Lord. So what does this look like? Well, lots could be said here, but let me say these things. 4 things. Love unconditionally. So, just as God loves you and I unconditionally, your covenant to your kids is to love them no matter what the situation is. Sometimes things can get, tough, but we never withhold love. We never withhold love. Love must prevail in our homes. Family is where you are loved unconditionally. No matter what discipline is needed, your kids somehow must know that mom and dad still love me. Where they know they can count on the support and love and mom and dad even when you don't deserve it, right? We must love our kids. Love as Jesus loved, with words and by action. We have to think about that. So some people are great at the actions, and some people are more expressive with words, but somehow we need to bring those together. Secondly, exercise grace as God does. We need grace because mom and dad, we're not. We know that, right? You are not perfect. Family relationships are designed by God, meant to be lived out in an atmosphere of grace and not law, because it's just simple reality. There's mistakes made. We're all sinful beings. Love leads to grace and forgiveness. And so a wise family leaves room for mistakes and yet keeps an atmosphere of graciousness and forgiveness. Parents, as I mentioned, are far from perfect, and we would do well because sometimes parents, we wrong our children. Has that ever happened to you? Yeah, we wrong our children. And so, righteousness means we apologize to them and ask for their forgiveness. We too must exercise humility. Remember that verse way back, it was 21? Submit one to another. Even parents need to do this in this type of situation. Admitting your wrongs. You might be surprised when you admit you're wrong to your children that their bitterness in their hearts will begin to dissipate. Children love honest mom and dads. They can see right through us, by the way, right? They're pretty good at that. Build your kids up to be who God designed them to be. Proverbs 22:6. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. Notice that the way, it doesn't say the way you think he should go. Son, you need to apply the same trade that I was raised on. You must be yada, yada, yada. No, it doesn't say that. Train them up in the way he should go, in the way God has designed him to go. I believe that's what it says. So every child is unique, and we're surprised that our children are maybe a lot different from mom and dad. Sometimes they're very much alike, but other times children are very different from us. And so we need to be very attentive to their needs, to how God built them, their strengths and their weaknesses, and direct them properly. So we need God's wisdom on this one for sure. Finally, lastly, we mentor our kids by emulation, not just information. Paul specifically instructs us to raise our children in the instruction of the Lord. And so by that, we are called to be spiritual mentors. It's interesting that one thing in the first century is that education was mostly about emulation rather than information giving. And I would say, if you want to highlight, there's a lot of negatives in the first century culture in parenting, as you notice, but this might be a positive. Today, with artificial intelligence, I mean, we have so much information at our fingertips, so much information than ever before. But parenting needs to be holistic learning, learning that only parents can do, really, because it's about targeting the heart and soul and mind and strength of our children. And so you might describe this as a mentoring relationship, not simply information dumping. Deuteronomy 6:5, one of my favorite passages on parenting, says this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. So first of all, he's talking to the adults, so the parents. These commandments that I give you today are to be in your hearts. He's speaking to parents. He's speaking to the adults. And then he says this: impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. I'm not sure what images come to your mind, but to me that's a description of simply doing life together. Is that the picture you get, right? Doing life together, getting up, walking, time you spend with family. These are the moments where we are communicating the truth of who God is by emulation, by example. It's not saying you don't say anything. Of course you say things, right? We walk and we talk, but it's really by your example. And so discipleship of our kids is doing life together. So first of all, it assumes mom and dad, you yourselves are walking with God. That's the first thing we notice. You are walking with God for yourself in your own life. That's the first thing. Our kids watch us, don't they? Right? Maybe not just small kids. Maybe when they grow up too, they're still watching, right? Maybe they're still watching. Children will tend to live as you live, and they will walk as you walk. Walk as you walk. All right, well, let me have a word of prayer. I'll call up the worship team. So, Lord, as we have meditated on your word, I am so glad that you care about the family. And we find these practical instructions that drill into just our own failures as parents, and yet it's so graciously taught, realizing that we do make flaws, but we need to simply live as you did, even in our parenting. And so I just pray your special blessing on the families of this church. None of us are perfect. Some of us come from difficult situations, and you know that well. But I pray that we will begin with where we're at and invite you, Lord, to lead and guide us to be the wise parents that we need to be. And as children, whether we're small or teenagers, young adults or older, may we have it in our minds that you want us to honor mom